Hi everyone, we should be live now. My name is Carrie Payne and I'm representing Tara from the Art of Estate Planning. Thank you so much for joining us. In terms of today, what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about farming families and strategies for farming families. In the process, we're going to be asking a little bit more like a forum rather than a direct line of questioning. So hopefully that's a little bit more relaxed for us today. If you have any questions, feel free at any time to pop questions and comments down. Tara's here. She's snuck in for the live. I can see she's saying hello. I'm really excited about this topic as a third or fourth generation Western Queensland girl. I think that this is a really important topic for a lot of people. So I'm really looking forward to it. We've got Nicky and Claudia here today, two of our superstar estate planning teams. If you want to introduce yourself, guys, and give us a little bit about you. So Nicky, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I am an estate planning lawyer based in Goondiwindi, Queensland. So we're on the McIntyre River, which means we've got a lot of clients in Queensland and New South Wales on the border. And we also operate in the Northern Territory and South Australia from time to time. I'm a micro firm. I'm here with one other lawyer and another 4 team members. And we've been operating since 2018, but have recently expanded out from just the estate planning and estate work into business services as well.
And Claudia?
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, Carrie. I'm Claudia Maw. My firm is Demeter Legal, so we are based in Albany, Western Australia, so diametrically opposite to Nicky in Queensland there. I've been in business as a lawyer down here since 2013, first as South Coast Legal and Conveyancing and now as Demeter Legal. Demeter Legal is more of an online firm, so we moved into that online space. I specialise in estate planning and agribusiness, so work with farming families all around the Great Southern, Southwest and Lower Wheat Belt, but we also offer estate planning services and business legal services for clients all across WA and also into the Northern Territory and South Australia as well. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Now, in terms of today, as I said, more of a Q&A, a bit of a panel sort of approach. So as I said, keep the questions coming through. Now, we've got a list of sort of questions I thought I might give to you guys and then see how you go with answering them. Certainly feel free to take the conversation in a direction that makes sense for you. But the first one I wanted to know was, what are some of the particular challenges or differences associated with the estate planning for farming families?
I think probably some of the differences with dealing with estate planning for farming families. I remember when I finished my law degree and really wanted to do work with agribusiness clients. It's really about the client base. It's not like an area of law particularly. I think it's about the clients. So generally they're sort of often high value, low return assets, big chunky high value assets, which are sometimes difficult to split up due to the low return and the viability. You've got strong emotional attachment to the assets, and I'm seeing more and more either really for wanting to hang on to those assets for the next generation, or very strongly not wanting to hang on to those assets for the next generation in terms of encumbering with them with it. What else do you think, Claudia?
Yeah, I think you've really touched on an important point there with the emotional ties. And I'd say particularly for farming families, as opposed to any other business family or family business, there's a real emotional tie, not just for the people who are in the business, but people that are in the family but not in the business. So your non-farming children often have really strong emotional ties to the land, to the place, to the lifestyle, but they don't have that investment in and connection to the business itself, or they did and they've left. So you're dealing with a lot of competing emotional need, not just the sort of business succession side of things. So I think that can be quite unique to farming families. I think you're very right on the fact that often you have very land-rich entities or land-rich families, but that doesn't translate into the ability to give everyone an equal share of the estate, because the land sort of sits there and it holds its value, but you don't want to chop that up in an estate planning scenario. And I think the other thing is that I sort of alluded to that, but you've got often you'll have sweat equity, and when you're doing your estate planning, you've got to be very conscious of promises that were made to people who may have been involved in the business, may still be involved in the business, versus what can actually be done with the assets and with the structure. So it is quite a and as you say, it's very much people first rather than looking at it as discretely estate planning. You have to look at the family as well and really consider all of that.
Claudia and Nicky, we've just had a really interesting question, which I picked up straight away as well. It's a term that not everybody's used to, but someone asked what sweat equity is, if you wanted to explain what that is.
Yeah, sure. So sweat equity is where it's quite common in startups as well, where someone may have worked in the business for less than award rate pay, on the promise that one day this will all be yours, my son, that sort of thing. So where someone has invested a lot of time and effort into the farm and hasn't necessarily been compensated at the level that they should be under the award necessarily, or at a rate that might be paid to a third party. So if you had a farm manager come in, you'd have to pay them at a certain rate to be able to get someone to meet your obligations under the award, but also to get someone viable to come in and manage your farm. Well, if you had, say, a son or a daughter who was doing that job for you, you might not be paying them at that rate, but they're doing it on the basis that one day they'll take over the farm and they'll be in control. So that's what we mean by that term.
Yeah.
Something else I feel that's really like there's a legacy of in this area in estate planning for farming families is I feel like there's a really long history of bad succession stories, like bad things that have happened and bad results and bad falling outs of family that you're almost up against before you even get into it. And I feel like it's really good to sort of set the ground rules and be dealing with it from a fresh perspective to sort of counteract that. Really, like there's so many stories about it and about probably like there's some really skilled succession facilitators out there, but there's a bunch of less experienced facilitators out there too that might not have had overly favourable results. And I feel that there's that real legacy there in this area that I think you've just got to be conscious of, that people are almost going to be a bit apprehensive. They're going to be on the sort of defence a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. So I have a family here that there was no discussion at the sort of patriarch level, no discussion whatsoever as a family. And there would be little remarks we've got one farming child and then 3 other non-farming children. There would be little remarks here, there, and it's nothing cohesive. And because of that, now that the sort of business owner is coming into the ownership of the land, when I met them, he didn't have a will and he was 55. He had nothing because his experience of or succession planning or lack thereof with his own parents was so poor. It just turned him off from doing it. And we've been working over the years to really get them into the mindset of, this is your time to flip that script and to have a really good discussion with your children about what happens next. So you are, as you say, Nicky, often working up against prejudices and poor experiences as well. So
Yeah. I know a family that don't talk to certain people because of a generational thing that happened three generations ago. So you definitely have some unique challenges. I've also got someone on Facebook saying that that's two of us that are in Albany. Do we have any other Albany practitioners? And I thought it raised a really interesting point about how a lot of this is also very much location based, you know, on the particular features of that farm as well, and where it is and what it's doing. So the next question I wanted to ask, and this is probably something that I think is really valuable to share for the listeners in today's live, hearing you say about how there's some really people that are really great at this, and obviously some people that are still in the process or the throes of learning that approach. What do you think, or how do you think estate planning advisors can make sure that they're providing a holistic solution for these clients? Because as we know, as estate planning lawyers, a will is just a will. Estate planning, if you're going to do it properly, should be holistic. So what do you think that they can do to help make sure that that process is holistic?
Do you want to take this one, Claudia?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's obviously a need to work with other advisors in the farming business, whether that's the accountant, financial planner if they have one, agronomist, all of those people, because I think that gives you a much better picture of where everything is. I think you have to obviously be aware that often you're dealing with a lot of different entities. So there might be a farming trust or a company that the actual farm is run through, and then some of the land might be in personal names or it might be in a different trust. So getting that picture is so important. And often clients will know that, oh yeah, we've got this trust or that trust, but if you're dealing with a lot of different land locations and lots and that sort of thing, hopefully the accountant will have a really good picture for you of which titles go with which trust and that sort of thing, so you can be a bit more we can be more accurate in your approach. And I think the other thing, and I'll let you touch on this, Nicky, is looking at it from it's got to be a living process. It's never just one and done. It's as is with any estate plan, but particularly with succession planning, it's, you know, you're looking at it from a much longer viewpoint, I think.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. I agree completely. It's I really feel when it's done well that they, like, I know we all talk about having living documents and that they're for now, but I find too in really dynamic farming families, particularly where there's more than one immediate family involved, that it's really great. Like we, you know, sort of doing annual checkups to see if things have changed, what has changed, does the estate plan need to change, or is the overall structure still sound? But those little check-ins I think are really helpful, especially if a family's in that period of flux, you know, where they're moving to transition to the next generation, or they're in the throes of it, because it's generally not something that you'll knock over in a few weeks. It's something that's going to take months and probably years in terms of having things structured properly to enable like tax and duty effective transfers, and to just have everyone feel very comfortable with the process and what's being put in place. And sometimes it's good to take baby steps so that everyone can feel comfortable and move forward without feeling pushed into it or rushed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to be looking at what can we do now what can we as lawyers put in place now, but also what can we suggest that could happen in 4 or 5 years' time? What can we sort of draw the family's attention to? What strategies can we suggest for 10 years or 20 years down the line? So you're taking such a long viewpoint. And I find with estate planning for a more traditional family, you would put something in place, as you say, for tomorrow, and then it's more of a case of checking in and saying what's happened. Whereas with succession planning for farming families, it's more what's going to happen. Like, you have to be really proactive with them and you want to be the one pushing that and checking in and saying, and checking in with the accountant saying, has this change been done? Have we put this person into this company, or has this person come into this partnership, or that sort of thing? So you can keep tabs on where things are, and then how does that move you into stage 2 of your documentation, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's quite a proactive role, I think, as opposed to a reactive one.
I wanted to check with you both, if it's okay. We talk a lot about in estate planning about, being collaborative and working together. Who would you see as being necessary to be in that room to be having like a family or a conciliatory type of meeting?
Yeah, I think it's really family based. I've got one coming up where we're going to have parent and immediate children and one spouse, but we're pulling it up there to just sort of the people that are either immediate family or immediately involved in the business. But then that when I say that, there's also going to be a financial advisor in the room as well, because I think that's a really important part of the succession planning process for farming families and other families as well outside of this space. I don't think we could sit in that room and successfully talk about options forward or alternatives or viability if I didn't have the financial advisor there as well. So there's that sort of perspective. And then I think it can be sometimes it can be really helpful. Sometimes it can be really unhelpful to have all of the extended family in the room. I think you've got to get a real feel for it and decide what's going to be the most effective. Because really at the end of the day, your goal is to have some kind of transition and also still have everyone sitting at Christmas lunch every year.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like that, isn't it? How many people do you need in the room to make it work, but not have too many cooks?
I think you have a really strong lean towards utilising like communication specialists or do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that sorry, Carrie. Yeah, so I have trained in collaborative practice with Zinta Harris at Resolve Estate Law, and in the context of succession planning, I think it's an amazing way to get people in the room and to get them to talk about things that they might not necessarily want to talk about. I think sometimes the accountant for the farming business is very much not aligned, but depending on, some people might not have a great relationship with that accountant. They might have their own accountant. So we're talking about, different generations having their own accountant. And I think that the collaborative practice is set up so that you have neutral professionals who come in and provide that advice in a very independent way. So you would have a financial neutral who can provide that advice on financial need for the various generations and your off-farm children as well. You would have a communications coach potentially as well, and particularly where succession planning is something that farmers have shoved down their throats a little bit, and they may have attempted to go through the process before, but it may not have worked very well. In my example of my family, there was no communication about it in a useful way. It was much more, he said this and she said that and that sort of thing. So having a communications coach who can help people with the way that they talk to each other, because obviously we're dealing with families and you tend to get entrenched in, you've had this relationship with your parent or with your child all your life, and you may have developed some unhealthy ways of communicating, let's put it that way. So the communications coach can come in and help you reassess how you discuss things. You'd also have potentially a mediator who would manage the process. So they're the one driving the strategic planning and making sure that everyone stays on task. So I think it's a really useful way, particularly where you have that family conflict, that it just allows people to be supported in the discussions more than they might be if they're just sitting in a room together and trying to discuss things the way they've always discussed them. So yeah, so I'm very hopeful for collaborative practice in the succession planning space. I think it's excellent.
In terms of thinking about other solutions, I mean, someone's got a question here, and it's certainly something I'd be interested to get your feedback on. You know, what are some of the solutions and other tools that can be used? So someone said here, you know, what typical options are there available where you've got mum and dad sort of a farming family, the main asset is the farm, and only one child works on the farm, and obviously they're wanting to divide things evenly. What sort of options do you think we have for a scenario like that?
Yeah, I was reading that. I think it's a really good question. I think that there's definitely not one answer. My first question for them would be, what does everyone want? In that, I think once you get to the crux of that question and delve into it a little bit more, sometimes it's not that everyone wants exactly equal distribution of the estate. It can be that they might want more help earlier on and less asset later on, that sort of thing. I think it also comes down to what the parents want. If they want to divide the estate evenly, then I think they can do that. And then maybe it'll depend on the viability of the operation, whether or not the operation can support transferring say there's 3 kids. So what we're talking about is potentially one farm child having to essentially buy out their 2 siblings. So does the viability of the operation lend itself so that can be facilitated, or does it not work that way? We've got so many different tools at our disposal for this, depending on what the goals are. But, you know, you can look at intergenerational transfer while they're alive. You could look at some kind of gifting to the farm child and then being paid out for the other shares to then gift to the other children. You could look at building up assets off farm to the point where the equal shares doesn't actually impact the farm viability as much. Like in a self-managed super fund or other investments. And then you could also look at, like if they're wanting to do an exact split now and I had one recently where they're wanting one child to take the farm and the farm's worth more than a third share. So they're still giving the farm to the farm child, but on the basis that he pays out his sibling a top up. So it's like a conditional gift. A gift conditional on him funding the payment of one of his siblings, and they're fortunate enough to have enough other off-farm assets that they don't need him to be able to pay out 2/3. So we do see a bit more conditional gifting. I know that's an area that can be probably riskier, but I feel like the benefit is really there in terms of the risk.
Yeah. I think I usually say, and sorry, Claudia, I'll let you jump in a second. I think you're absolutely right what we said earlier about you really don't do anything without the financial team involved, and particularly where you're doing this sort of conditional gifting, that number one, you're looking at making sure you've determined how they're going to work out the value of the property, if the one kid is going to buy the other kid out, and making sure you've really hardwired that into the will, if that's something that's really important to the family, to get that certainty around how that's calculated. And also, I often find, obviously depending on the size of the particular farm, but having some sort of contact and communication piece with the financier for their operations as well, because often those things again are intergenerational, and making sure that they're in communication. So when it's their turn to buy out the farm, they've got the right person there to help them fund that purchase.
Yeah, I can just see a question there. Is it conditional gifting in the will or current? Yeah, I was talking about conditional gifting in the will, but, you know, and we've basically given them a 2-year period to be able to arrange finance and facilitate the funds. But you could do it current too. You could do an intergenerational transfer that's like partially by gift, partially by them going and getting finance for the remainder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could also set up something like not an annuity. I mean, it's called an annuity a lot, but it's not technically an annuity, where it's like an annual payment from the child to the parents after the transfer happens. So that money can then go into the estate and be available for other children. I think there was a sort of a follow-up question here. It's how can you do an exact split when one child is working on the farm? Or I suppose my question is, why are we doing that? I sort of agree with that. I say to a lot of my clients, fair doesn't mean equal. You're not necessarily going to be able to get an exact equal split where you have one asset that comprises the bulk of your estate and other assets, hopefully, that are of lesser value. So I think having the conversations is really important. And as you say, you know, the off-farm kids might be happy with the fact that they're getting a house in Perth or Albany or whatever it is, and that's fine. And because you've had that discussion, everyone's aware of what's happening. I think the other point that I wanted to make is when you're giving someone a farm, you're also potentially giving them a lot of debt as well, and you're giving them uncertainty, and that you're giving them a business model that doesn't always thrive, you know, depending on climatic conditions or, you know, international commodities markets. There is so much unknowns in the farming space. There's no guarantee that kid is going to then run off, and I think, you know, it's knowing your beneficiaries and knowing whether is that kid going to run off and sell the farm the minute you've popped your clogs, or are they genuinely invested in carrying this on and making a living from it and then passing it down to their children as well. So having these conversations is so important, because it's easy for us to assume that the kid that gets the farm is just going to sell the farm because land prices have gone crazy, and that's, you know, who wouldn't do that? Or to assume that the off-farm kids are going to be really upset if they don't get an equal share. So I think that's always got to be your starting point. And so having family meetings, whether a more traditional model or a collaborative model, is so important.
Yeah. I mean, someone's brought up the really important part here about, you know, what about the commitment of the child that's been on the farm, as you said, that's been putting in that sweat equity? How do you acknowledge that, especially if one child is to receive half the share of that property but isn't putting anything into it? So there's some interesting ideas there. Is that something that you've turned your mind to before?
Yeah, I've seen it valued like at a market rate, like what a market rate salary would have been through that period. I've seen people look at like the opportunity lost. What else could they have gone to do to generate income that they haven't done because they've been there and supporting the first generation, you know, in continuing this operation that this legacy that they've built. But in the end of the day, it's like most valuations, it's just about coming up with a bit of a formula that everyone's comfortable with and then sticking with it.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions that have come in. Someone's asked a question here about specifically, do you ever prepare a windfall deed, that if one child is going to receive a larger share than the others, that part of the sale proceeds, if it's sold within a certain number of years, come back to the other children?
Yeah, I've actually done that quite recently, where we've done a deed of family arrangement effectively. So this was a case where we were able to get the one of the kids is now off farm but spent 20 years on the farm. There's another family member who's currently running the farm, and then there's a few off farm kids as well. And we got all of them together and said, look, this is the plan. And fortunately, they're all very, you know, happy, and they love their parents, and they want to do whatever makes their parents happy. So there wasn't any there weren't any arguments or anything. And yet we've just said, look, that effectively the farm goes to this one person effectively, but if that farm is sold within X years of the death of the patriarch and matriarch, then they are to pay X amount to these other people. If it's, so say it's 5 years, say it's 10 years, then that percentage goes down because they're the ones that have been putting in the work for that longer period of time. So yeah, so it was actually a really good way, and I think it really helped to allay any fears on the part of the patriarch and matriarch that that's what would happen. And they love their family member, and they trust them, and they've been told by that family member that no, this is it, this is me. But things change, life happens, and they might decide to get out of that operation. So
yeah. Someone's asked, with that type of deed, do you register it? Does it act like a caveat over the property? My experience is that you don't register them, and it doesn't really act as like a caveat, because I'm in Queensland, obviously, so is Nicky, but Claudia's in WA, and we have listeners all around Australia that the title doesn't like you putting on caveats for fun. So you have to be really, really careful, and you can be liable for costs if you just go throwing caveats everywhere. So I would just be really, really cautious of that, and looking at your other obvious contractual rights to enforce it if something did happen. I also think what's really relevant here in talking about this concept of the value of an interest in a farm is that it's all only value if you can find a buyer, right? Like if a kid wants to get off a farm in a hurry because they've just had enough, or it's no longer physically they can't do it, something like that. I've seen families for years stuck on properties that didn't want to be there because they don't have buyers. And it's even harder now because of the way that Australia is putting in all these regulations around foreign ownership of things like that as well. So it's harder for international buyers to come in. And so I sort of think that's a really important thing to think about, that it's only worth that market value if there's the market. So
yeah, it's a good time right now in ag, I think, to be doing succession planning. Like you don't see a lot of activity in this space in drought, for example, unless it's like under pressure. Whereas in good times, when there's more cash available to facilitate different deals, where land's worth considerable money at the moment, where there's more flexibility with banking and finance arrangements, and stock's worth good value, then there's a lot more opportunity.
In terms of the point that someone else has made as well, I find it interesting that someone has mentioned that what we also have to think about in that concept of value is that the kid that's walked away with $1 million of cash rather than the farm, I mean, there's lots of investment opportunities for them as well, that they get that flexibility that the farming kid will never get. And so looking at, making sure as a part of that collaborative approach that you're explaining that to that child as well, because they might not agree with the way the split happens or the valuation process. But when you really sort of break it down for them and say, you can spend your $1 million however you want, compared to this kid that doesn't get anything other than the land they're standing on, which is really valuable if someone wants to buy it or you work your butt off on it. There's a lot of value to be gained there by educating the parties as well.
Yeah, that goes back to what Claudia was saying before about the holistic approach and having those the neutral professionals come in to give their perspective. I think that can really help in that situation.
Yeah. I think, and it's been raised here a couple of times, especially in the comments, that equal isn't always the right answer. Sometimes it's horses for courses. So one of the things I wanted to talk about and get your input on today is in families where succession planning discussions have failed. So things have got to a point where there's just not going to be a resolution between the parties on something they all agree with. What options do we have to get something in place for these families, to get the testators the peace of mind to know that at least what they're doing is getting somewhere?
Well, I think it goes back to using the model available through collaborative practice is a really good way to do that, because you're not just dealing with the numbers, you're not just dealing with your accountants, financial planners and lawyers, but you're also bringing in communications coaches, potentially counsellors, particularly if there's been a really rough road and things need to be talked through before we can even get in the room to have the discussion about the succession planning. We might need to do a little bit of groundwork with our clients and their families on getting to them to a place where they can actually discuss this. So being open to bringing in professionals outside of the traditional succession planning model, I think is really helpful for us, as if we're the ones that are sort of steering the project, then it's something that we have the flexibility to do. I think the other thing is it's really, it may take a long time. And I think that's where, with lawyers, when we're approached by a client, we kind of want to get things tied up in a nice bow because we have worries about our liability potentially, but recognizing that this is a process that often takes several years with a family, and even with a family that's on good terms and good standing, the process may take, over a year to 2 years to get everyone sort of on board, to get, do things in the right time. As you said earlier, Nicky, you've got to take into consideration tax consequences. The accountants will know, when's the best time to do X, Y, Z, because it will have the best tax outcome for the client. So it's really just being patient and knowing that this process will take time, but that it can happen, and that it can happen for any family, even families who have struggled previously.
Yeah, I find it sometimes really helpful too to actually have there's circumstances where you're always going to recommend that everyone gets independent legal advice, like in the example of a deed of family arrangement. But I actually find that quite helpful. I feel like it can move succession planning process that's sort of got off track. You can get it on track by collaborating with the other advisors, in that generally everyone often wants something pretty similar. And you can just sort of work with the other advisors to help the clients, then sometimes that can help you get there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Often people will come and they want you to be the sole lawyer because they're very mindful of costs. But having someone, and I think, either in a traditional model or a collaborative model, everyone having their own lawyer is really helpful, because it's just having that person to kind of nudging people into making decisions and not letting things draw out too long or fester, or, and really having someone on that person's side saying, what are you thinking about this? How did you feel about that meeting? Was there anything that you didn't say that you wanted to say? Or, and bringing that back into the conversation. So 100% agree with that, Nicky.
Make people feel really confident that they're not making silly decisions, or they're not just giving into something, that they've got good and independent advice, and they can feel confident to make those decisions instead of, burying their heads in the sand.
I sometimes think more lawyers, more problems, guys, but I think this is one of those situations where we certainly need absolutely, with independent advice. I totally agree. That's really important in families like this. But as you said, I think it can also be a bit of a reality check sometimes as well, that lawyers can give you the brutal truth about what might happen if you just can't get it sorted. So it is one of those times. There's a really good question here, and I certainly don't know if I know the answer, but I'm happy to hear otherwise. people are asking about whether there's any courses or training about how to facilitate those sorts of processes. And I mean, first thing obviously that comes to mind to me, Claudia, you raised it before, is Zinta's collaborative approach.
Yeah.
I almost feel sometimes that it's definitely a really psychology-based approach that you have to do to these sorts of things. So I don't think anything in that realm would go astray. Is there anything, Nicky or Claudia, that you know about?
That's really the only thing I off the top of my head, and obviously that's not specific to rural succession planning, but it's very helpful because it does. Zinta's course, so it's a 2-part course. There's your sort of standard course and then the advanced course. It does really dive into the psychology of why people make decisions and negotiating in different ways and that sort of thing. So I think that's been it's a very, very useful course if this is an avenue that you want to pursue. I would imagine that there are a lot of agri-focused groups that might do things. They're probably more focused at farmers more than the advisors, but if you can get on one of those, you're seeing it from your client's perspective. So I think that that's pretty useful.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I'd be like throwing yourself into your local grains group, into your local livestock group or whatever's going, because they're the ones that are out there seeking it. And I think there's plenty on it. There's some really good guides out there. I was just trying to think which industry bodies have put them out. I think there's a GRDC one, a grains one. That's really interesting. The dairy industry has really fantastic legal resources that they've pulled together themselves. Where else have I seen good training? I think going back to basics, like I really enjoyed up here in Queensland, the Bond University, I think it's a negotiating and mediating course.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is some sort of mediation practice. I think STEP do them as well. Someone said QFF has done and still running some great webinars on that topic as well. I think they're really unique scenarios, and you do need to understand the community that you're advising in. Having lived in both Roma and Chinchilla, getting amongst the community and understanding the things that are particular to that area and to those people as well. We can do all this training we like, but we have to understand the market. We just understand the target, what's happening for them. I'm just going through the questions. A couple of people from New South Wales saying in relation to our deed of family arrangement that they think it's an interest in land, so it is caveatable down there, and certainly your agreement can say that it is. Happy to hear that. Definitely, because I'm in Queensland, not in New South Wales. So in terms of someone said very quite funnily, which is absolutely true, when you go
because we were talking about it before we started. So
you have to talk about the rain. You have to know whether or not it's going to be good if it rains or bad if it rains. You have to know what time of year it is, whether or not it's harvest, whether or not it's picking, whether or not it's branding. And if you do, have someone you can ask. Like I always where we are, so that I'm not asking a stupid question or trying to book a meeting at a stupid time.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
And they're all morning people, so don't expect a late afternoon appointment.
And get ready on rainy days. Like, that's all they do. They sit in their office and they're like, great, what jobs can I get done in the office today? I'm in here again for weeks again. Just get ready for your phone hot.
Absolutely. I actually think that farming is one of the biggest gambling jobs I've ever seen in my life. You're gambling on things that you have absolutely no way of predicting or understanding or controlling. So, and when you realise that and you're talking to these people, you see why it's so emotional for them. Because there's all of this intergenerational stuff tied in with stuff they can't control, which must be really, there must be something that they think about all the time. Noting that we're coming up towards 1 o'clock, I think what I wanted to check in with you both is that, have you got any advice or feedback for people that are dealing with, because I think the worst case scenario is we could probably manage, if we're new to farming families, some simple sort of things, as you said, sort of conditional gifts and whatever else. If you come across a group that is, you've got land over in this trust, you've got water allocations over in this trust, you've got the actual business in a company that's doing all the cattle running or whatever else, and then you've got the plant and equipment in another company that boxes everything, or what sort of things or what pieces of advice would you give to people that come head on with one of these? Obviously only practice in things that you're comfortable with. Is this the first one? But is there anything that any tips or tricks that you have in the back of your head when you see something like that?
Yeah, you have to really get into the documents and understand what's going on. Like you've got to, you hear people banging on about this all the time, but you need to read the source documents. Like I wouldn't do anything without seeing the deeds and the constitutions and the variations. We go through all of that. And then I don't touch anything without seeing the financials, because all we need is like some good beneficiary accounts or some like inter-entity loans just to like undo everything. What else that I would look at in that scenario? I think you've got to understand all the tools that are at your disposal. Like just because you're doing estate planning doesn't mean you're only just going to whip out your will and your enduring power of attorney and your deed of family arrangement. I often still use leases, land use agreements, plant use agreements, all sorts of other types of agreements to facilitate whatever the plan is that they come up with, to either add certainty, to facilitate some kind of arrangement that still satisfies capital gains tax, small business requirements, but also gives everyone pretty well the deal that they were looking for. Don't go into it, without a good tax advisor behind you. Don't forget the duty. Yeah, it's you've got to be broad.
Yeah. I think you do have to have a real commercial mind, as Nicky says. Like you really have to look at it from the perspective of the business. Like in your will and all of that, that's your last document. You've got so much going on, or so much that could be going on before you get to that point. So having that overview and having a knowledge of those various different types of agreements, it can help to free up money. So where someone is not confident about doing a family farm transfer now, maybe they'll lease something to the family member. So they'll be leasing land, or they might be, we've done a couple of years ago, we did it was like a land lease, a livestock lease, a plant and equipment lease. And that's leading into the handover, which is going to happen in a few more years. So it's just letting your clients know that it's not something that they have to do right now, and it has to be, the handover has to happen now or when they die. Like there are different ways that they can lead in, and giving them certainty about the plan as well by doing these kind of interim arrangements as well. It's so important. So having a really good commercial knowledge of leasing, licensing, as you say, access rights, all that sort of thing, having a broader knowledge of agribusiness law it's really important.
I think we're really the facilitator for a lot of other connect points to bring everything together for the estate plan. I mean, I work at a few different law firms, and one of the clients in one of those firms just always buying things, land, water allocations, but I finally got it drilled in that anytime they go to purchase anything, let me know, so that I can give them advice on which entity to purchase it through. to suit the estate plan. So I think that proactive planning is really important as well for any new purchases or to support any disposals, so you can adjust things if you need to. And that requires having a really great relationship with the family and an ongoing relationship with the family, and a great relationship with the financial team as well. So, you know, we're in professional services, sometimes we like to make jokes and we like to pick on all the other types of professions, but really we're in it together. I mean, someone said it down here, don't go it alone without proper financial advice and documents, and don't do it cheaply, which sounds like every single estate planning issue. It absolutely is that. It's just obviously got these unique features that you only get with those sorts of things.
Yeah, we all know what it feels like when you're brought into something at the tail end of a deal. Like, get the other advisors, the other, you know, professionals involved with you like quite early, so that they can have some input, so that they can feel comfortable with it. You know, don't be doing it, stitching up a whole deal and then bringing in the accountant or the financial advisor or the banker or someone to try and say, you know, okay, ready, let's do this.
No,
it's nothing worse.
No. These can be some of the.
Sorry, go ahead.
These can be some of the most rewarding client relationships that you have, because there is so much invested on the part of the family. Being kind of invited into that is just so wonderful, and I think that you really have an opportunity to build really long-standing, solid relationships there. So yeah, make sure you do it right from the off and get everyone involved, and make sure you are doing all your due diligence as well. So, but the payoff is enormous, not just financially.
I think you bring people, until you go through the process with a big family like that are so emotionally connected to what happens, the value you provide really can't be put in numbers in many ways. I've just got a question here, again, keeping in mind our timing. Someone's just asked here, you know, do we think that there's a growing attitude from the next generation to kind of push out mum and dad? You know, finding that balance between obviously them wanting to know that they've got certainty about what's going to happen with the stuff they've done versus the parents obviously needing a secure financial future.
Yeah, I would say my experience to date has been the opposite. I would have thought that there was a growing attitude from younger generation to make sure that their parents are secure in their financial future. I think there's a growing confidence or a growing attitude to be able to, like, I'm getting more and more younger generation coming for the independent advice piece. I feel like they're more confident, they're more aware, they're more informed, and they want to be informed. They want to know what they're taking on. They want to be happy about it. It's not just a here it is and yes, I'm happy to take that. But I wouldn't say I'm seeing any more wanting to push mum and dad out. What do you think, Claudia?
Sorry, there's a follow-up. My comment touches on this as the need for financial security and retirement for the first gen is essential for the next gen to have independence. Oh, I agree with that, but I wouldn't say that there is sort of an attitude of, okay, well, you've had your time, now off you go. There's very often there's a sense of how do we honour and ensure that you are taken care of, even if you're not connected legally to the farm anymore. And that's been my experience recently. You know, I have a client who owns much of the land. Part of it's owned through a trust, which the parents are still involved in. And with changes to the work health and safety regime in WA, I've seen actually a bit more of an increase in trying to push the parents out, but more to relieve them of any liability in that space. So but how do we do this in a way that, you know, honours their gift to us? So we've done things where, and I think often, as was the case here, the sandwich generation in the middle is quite willing to pay tax, duty, whatever it is, to ensure that the older generation has those assets that they can be certain will help to fund their retirement, and make sure they've got somewhere to live, make sure that there's provision for aged care if they need it, that sort of thing. So I think there's perhaps it's that growing awareness of the responsibilities of being in the sandwich generation, that people are now not just sort of they're not taking things it's how do I keep caring up and down and make sure that that's taken care of. So yeah, I'd agree with you, Nicky. I don't think it's it comes from a negative place at all. I think a lot of it is very positive.
That was probably us too, though, in that we wouldn't really be interested in acting for clients that were wanting to do that either, I don't think.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I've definitely seen a situation that someone's talking about here happen before, and as you said, we tend to be able to, well, fortunate enough to pick our clients in a lot of instances. Yeah. And I imagine that as the planners, we don't see as much of the litigation that stuff like this can be preempted by. Yeah. Just noting that it's just before 1 o'clock. I just wanted to say thank you both to Nicky and Claudia for joining us. It's been really insightful hearing what you're talking about there, and certainly great to see the level of dedication that you both have to making that process holistic. I think that is something that we're always screaming as estate planning practitioners, and it's nothing more truer than in this sort of scenario. Again, really appreciate the time that you spent giving us the information about some of the things that we need to know or be aware of when we're going down the process. I'm certainly Googling the word agronomist after this, because I know I've heard the term, but I don't actually understand what it is. So that's going to be number one on my priority after this. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We've really appreciated all your questions, and hopefully we're looking forward to seeing you again at the next live.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carrie.